ask you, if someone was to ask you how you look back on the Iraq situation, 2003. I mean, I know you were somewhat involved with the Hutton inquiry and that case with Parliament. How do you how do you feel about that now when you look back?
What, Hutton?
Yeah.
In particular, you mean? Well, the BBC made some errors in its reporting and how it handled the government's complaints about it, but I think broadly what David Kelly told a number of journalists, not just Andrew Gilligan, has turned out to be true. There was real doubt about the way the intelligence was being presented in the dossier, certainly within the defence intelligence community, and, as it turns out, the intelligence we now know was wrong, and some of it was invented. Now, at the time, nobody, including some of those in government, making the complaints against the BBC and all the rest of it, knew all of that. But David Kelly, in talking to a number of journalists, it turns out was right. I don't think that makes, you look back and you think, well, the BBC should have handled it better, and the government were probably wrong to, prosecute their complaint in the way they did, and, poor David Kelly got pushed to suicide. So, all of that is, terrible in many ways. But broadly, Kelly was right. BBC should have handled it better, and the government should certainly have handled it better.
What was the sort of errors in the reporting of it?
Well, Andrew Gilligan basically didn't have a close enough note of what David Kelly told him, so he kind of, was trying to reflect in broad terms what he could remember David Kelly saying. So he should have had a much closer note of what Kelly told him. The Today programme wasn't responsive enough to government wanting to put in a proper reply or presenting it to government in advance what they were going to say to enable Downing Street to respond properly to it. And then, Mr. Campbell kind of mounted this incredibly aggressive campaign against the BBC, which pushed the BBC into a corner into being overly defensive. And, that created a climate in which there couldn't be rational discussion of what was going on. So, in that very aggressive climate, the BBC got very defensive. Campbell ratcheted up even further. David Kelly was outed. Campbell and government hung him out to dry in front of, the Foreign Affairs Committee in public and on television, and he killed himself afterwards. So, I think all of that was, incredibly regrettable, really. If Gilligan had taken a proper note, if he'd reported it more carefully, if the programme had handled it more carefully in terms of the way it dealt with government, if Alistair Campbell had managed it, to push his case in a proper way rather than an incredibly aggressive way, then things may have turned out differently.
When you say you look back now and it turned out that in actual fact there was a lot of truth to what the reports were in terms of I think the phrase that was used, there was some sexing up over the dossier. With the fact that someone has lost their life, do you still see that as being worth it? Like reporting that's worth that for the public?
I don't think. I'm sorry, I don't think of it in those ways. Does it keep me awake at night? No. Am I deeply regretful for the Kelly family, for David Kelly, that he was, because he had his career ended and he was, paraded in public, that he failed to do that? Yes, I think that's incredibly regrettable. Do I wish the BBC had handled it better? Yes. Do I feel any responsibility? No. Do I think the BBC holds direct responsibility? No. It's a very complex situation. To say, was the story worth it? Well, you can't make that assessment in hindsight. What you have to do is make the assessment with what you have at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I just ask, how did Kelly's identity get leaked?
Well, there's stacks of stuff I can send you on this. It's basically he came forward and was promised anonymity, and then because Campbell wanted to out him, they had a deal whereby if people asked the right questions to the Ministry of Defence press office, they would confirm it was him. And they then leaked enough details for anybody, if you put it into Google, for his name to come up. So basically the government kind of forced his name out into the open.
Why did he come forward?
I think there was so much pressure internally, probably. But